Welcome to the Ed Collab gathering today. My name is Michele Haiken, and I'm going to be talking about how do the choices we make impact the world, blending science and English in an investigative journalism writing unit of study that I do with my 8th graders. I am an 8th grade middle school teacher outside of New York City, and I also am an adjunct professor of literacy at Manhattanville College, and I'm honored today to be part of the Ed Collab gathering. This is such an amazing day, and just the energy from the keynote speaker was so effective, and I'm really excited because so much of what Phil Blinder talked about sparking a light bulb for our students and bringing student voice to the forefront is really what my unit and what I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes and answer your questions about how do we bring student voice to the forefront through writing and inquiry, and at the same time connecting literacy across the disciplines. So I'm going to just try and share my screen with you. Give me a second to see if I can do this. So that I can show you where you can access some of the slides. I will be jumping back and forth between slides and then talking and answering your questions. So feel free to tweet out some of your questions that you have while I am talking. The hashtag is the Ed Collab Gathering #3. You could also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is The Teaching Factor, and I give you a QR code and a link to my slides if you want to see some of the slides, because I am going to be showing some of my students' work as I talk through the unit and things that I have done to help bring student voice to the forefront in my classroom. So let's go back to, let's see if I can now go back to me. Oh, okay, great. All right. So this unit stems from an investigative journalism unit of study that I wanted to do with my students. I sort of balance between reading and writing. I'm of the Teachers College Reading and Writing workshop mentality. So my classroom is really a space where my students are Teachers College Reading and Writing workshop mentality. And students are reading and writing as much as possible. I want to cultivate a love of literature in my classroom. I want to build student empathy. I want my students to really look at the world around them critically and closely so that they can see that they have the power to speak up and also make a difference. So a lot of the books that we read and the writing that we do hones in around those ideas. So this piece and unit actually started with one specific question that I posed to my students right on the beginning of the unit. What do you wish that you could change community, your country, and your world? And I pose this as our hook to the unit to help students start to think about and look at our community. And our community could be as small as our classroom. It could be, if we want to go bigger, at our school, the community that we live in, thinking bigger in terms of our country, and then even bigger our world. And I asked my students to write down ideas, just different seed ideas of what they what they wanted to change, or things that they were interested in, because the larger question and the essential question for the unit was really, how do the choices that we make impact the world? Social studies and English lend itself really well with historical fiction and writing and DBQs. A space where my students are, but I wanted to bring together an aspect of science. Reading and writing as much as possible. I want to cultivate a love of literature in my classroom. I want to build student empathy. So this was a unit that was grounded in informational text, and the end result was that students were going to write their own science-based investigative journalism articles with that guiding question of, how do the choices we make impact the world? You know, science has so many different places where literacy it is embedded throughout, and I wanted to make that conscious connection for my students so that they can see how what they're learning in earth science or physical science, they can investigate it more with a critical eye and write more about it, and also bring in their own personal interests and inquiry to help develop their writing. And science is a huge umbrella of topic, and it didn't necessarily have to be about earth science or physical science. We talked about biology. We talked about the social sciences and psychology to really help my students hone in on a topic that was important to them. So in putting the unit together, I'm going to just go back to my screen share for a second, because I want to show you, and sorry, I want to tap into the Common Core, because that's something that I follow, and something that my school and in New York State, we have just adopted the next generation science standards. So I just want to take a moment to really just talk about how, you know, I was tapping into elements of the Common Core, as well as addressing the next generation science standards, which, if you take a closer look at them, it has a three-dimensional approach to learning. You know, it looks at science as both a body of knowledge and as an evidence-based model and theory-building enterprise that continually extends, refines, and revises knowledge. And it presents three dimensions that it could be combined to form with each standard. And those three ideas, and I'm reading from the next generation science standards, is the core idea, the practices, and the cross-cutting. And I wanted to tap those pieces because for students to be critical readers and writers, we're asking them to ask questions. And the science is in the standards is also about asking questions. It's about analyzing and interpreting text as well as data. It's about designing possible solutions and having a call to action piece in terms of our argumentative writing. And it's about engaging in argument through evidence and research, and really helping my students to see that that we need to be critical readers and writers of information and of text. Let me just go back to my screen share. Up, no, oh, okay, there, we're good. So we started with the students collecting possible ideas. And from there, I wanted them to live like investigative journalists and like science writers. So that meant they were collecting possibilities. They were doing a lot of research. We looked at model and mentor texts to generate our ideas. I told students really to hone in based on their map of what they want to change about the world, to hone in on 3 possible ideas and do some investigative work about that so that they could actually see which was the topic that they were most interested in. And so we've spent the first week sort of just investigating and figuring out what was the idea that they were going to commit to. You know, students are actively reading texts, they're asking questions, they're finding common themes, and they're just taking some notes. And at that time, I'm also sharing a lot of model and mentor text to help them to generate their ideas. And with the model and mentor text, I'm constantly pulling in creative pieces that will help them to show them that writing doesn't have to follow this mentality of the 5-paragraph essay or the literary essay that they just finished writing about. In fact, that, you know, we are going to sort of explode that idea of what an essay is and look at how voice comes to the forefront of that. And I'll share with you a little mentor, a text that I share with my students this year that I found that I thought was very funny and creative, and the students sort of were surprised that we would be reading this. Here is just a little timeline. So we have a week of the models and the mentor text where we're generating ideas. I'll talk a little more about the research and the annotated bibliography, and then we get into the actually nitty-gritty writing and revising and publishing. But the mentor text I had come across, and I look across all different magazines and newspapers and different books to help hone in on voice, that tap into science-related ideas that we can look as a mentor piece, and that we can actually notice some of the craft moves that the writer is doing. And this mentor text that I kicked off the unit was from Mary Beth Griggs in Popular Science. The title is "What Goes in Your Toilet Might Be a Literal Gold Mine." And I wanted a shock and awe piece, and I have collected a variety of different texts to help my students like get the information that is engaging and interesting and also a little outside of the norm, and at the same time that has some valuable craft lessons in it. So this article was about our waste or excrement and how the American Chemical Society is looking at waste and our excrement for the metals and the possibility of recycling the metal. I love the line, with nearly 320 million people living in the United States, that's a substantial gold mine. If scientists can figure out how to sift the valuables from sludge, we have a whole new idea in terms of how we look at waste and recycling and metals and where these metals come from. And this was a one-page article that just was a great piece for my students to read, to learn about. It did have that yuck factor, which my students were intrigued about, and help them to see the type of writing that I was asking them to do. Because when we're talking about science, it has to be grounded in research, and that's where we would then go based with our information and our topics. So we would research it a little more and start to explore and see what we could take from different perspectives about that topic. So I gave students a week to research information they could find about their topic, but what I did was I had them compile an annotated bibliography. I wanted them to find 4 or more reliable and valid sources that would help them to write their feature pieces, because the idea is that all good writing is grounded in solid research. And this also lent itself to a great lesson about what is valid and reliable research and where do we find that. And I had an entire lesson where I pulled in different articles and websites for students to evaluate, because again, we want students to be critical consumers of text, to be critical consumers of information. They need to, and through all their research, be questioning where their information is coming from. And students spent some time, a few days, looking for that information and looking at websites and questioning, is this a blog? Is this someone's opinion? Is this research-based? Who are the sources? Where did the information come from? How old is the information? And these are important research questions that we want students to have throughout their schooling to help them with their writing and to help them formulate their ideas. I had my students use EasyBib, which is http easybib.com, so that they could properly cite each text that they use. And once they had their research, their facts or statistics and testimony, it was then time to begin writing. And I'm going to just show you the annotated bibliography assignment so that you can see what I was asking of my students. Oh, here we go. Oops, nope. Okay, there we go. So this was the checklist that I gave my students, and you'll see that I wanted them to summarize the article. I wanted them to evaluate the credibility and the validity of the author or the website. And again, through the lessons about reliability, credibility, and validity, they were able to articulate and evaluate the sources that they were looking at. They were able to see what was biased and what was grounded in facts or statistics, and looking at testimony. And also, I wanted them to be reflective and to explain how the article was going to inform or informs their thinking and how it might be useful in their own investigative article. And this gave them they had about a week to actually put together this annotated bibliography. So once that we had our research, then it was time to actually begin crafting our lesson. And we started with the beginning, what else but the lead. And in journalism, it's the LEDE, not also known as a lead or a hook. And I gave my students lots of different examples to help them look at the beginnings, because our beginnings are the most important part of a text and our writing. So the first few sentences of writing have to hook the reader and have to draw them into the text. My students know that from their essay writing and their creative writing, and it's exactly the same with an investigative journalism piece. You know, students need to craft an opening that's going to capture the reader's attention and at the same time evoke a response to the topic. And I think I showed my students an example from Jenna Fisher in the Christian Science Monitor. She has a great lead that I showed to my students. She says, Tom McNichol has fished a lot of strange things out of Boston's Charles River. Among the most unexpected are a portable toilet, a recliner, and a dead body. So this sort of jolts you for a number of reasons, but the dead body is that unexpected. We have the details and specifics, and this really helps them to see what the lead needs to have to the excitement or the energy. And I'll just take a moment to just do a little tangent for a second. You'll see the pictures on both sides of the opening that I have. These are my students' notebooks. I've sort of combined a reader and writer's notebook together with an interactive English notebook. I'm very big and dedicated to foldables and interactive foldables, which are three-dimensional graphic organizers. So these are graphic organizers that I have made for my students, and they have within their notebooks so that it helps them to sort of create their own textbook of the key concepts that we're talking about so that they could then apply it in their writing. And on the left was the first, when my students start the school year writing a literary essay, we talk about 6 different ways to start an essay: a fact or a statistic, a telling quote, a definition, just restating the essay question, a vivid description, or a rhetorical question. So they have those 6 strategies in their notebook that they can use to write an opening essay. And we looked at those to think about if and looked at different examples from different publications, from Wired magazine or National Geographic or the science section in the New York Times, to see if science writers are using those same strategies. And on the right side, I had made a different foldable with the leads where I had different samples of the leads where students can actually look at the different moves, because yes, we saw a lot of the same leads, but we also saw some different strategies that our writers were using. And that might be a description, yes, that might be rhetorical questions, there might be a teasing out of ideas. Maybe the writer is layering on facts and statistics or giving a summary or comparing and contrasting. So here, oh, it looks like my slides aren't showing, so stop sharing, sorry. That's weird. Okay, got it. So I would give my students the different leads, and they would look and match and then try out some of the leads. We played a few games for students to try out different leads, to share their leads so that they can then begin at the beginning and get our and get some interesting and engaging hooks as well. So I'll read to you one of the leads that one of my students had, since my slides aren't sharing. But I'll share up my link to my slides so you can look at it again. So Ellie begins her lead begins, picture this. You wake up and eat breakfast. You eat your favorite sugared cereal, Fruit Loops, then sit in a classroom for 5 hours. Now it's time for lunch. You eat a pack of mini Oreos, your pasta with red sauce, and a 12-ounce bottle of mini berry Gatorade. You aren't even done yet. You finish off lunch with a bag of baked Lay's potato chips. You get home and it's time for a healthy snack, or what you think is healthy, an apple with peanut butter. Now it's time for dinner, a cheeseburger with condiments and fries. Can't forget about dessert. You have a bowl of ice cream and end the night. Now let's calculate. Breakfast, 12 grams of sugar. Lunch, 41 grams of sugar. Snack, 21 grams of sugar. Dinner, 22 grams of sugar. Congratulations, you have consumed 97 grams of sugar today. Now, let's see how this will affect you later on. What I love about Ellie is that actually for her research, she polled the class to ask them what they had eaten for breakfast and for lunch and dinner and the snacks that they had. So she was actually bringing in the testimony of her classmates to use as the basis of her lead. And she sort of walks us through and gives us a play-by-play before she actually gets to what the main idea of her whole article is about, and that's about how sugar is harmful to your health. So, you know, here she's layering on some facts, and not necessarily facts and statistics, but she's layering on the details. She's very descriptive, and she teases out her ideas. And these were all just different models that she had seen that she put into her piece. I also have another example from, share your entire desktop. So I also have another example from Olivia where she also takes on this descriptive element. She begins with a whole series of adjectives. She writes unsuccessful, unloved, disadvantaged. These are all words to describe kids who grow up with a single parent. But from a personal experience, I know that it is not how it is. On September 1, 2002, 2 months before I was born, my dad died. This resulted in my mom becoming a single parent before I was even born. Instead of feeling unloved or like I'm missing out, I feel like it has benefited me more than if I had both my parents. So, you know, you'll notice with both Ellie and Olivia's example, they're using rhetorical devices like ethos and pathos and logos to support one's claim. And that was a lesson that we had talked about and we had focused on in terms of our writing. I wanted my students to see, and we've talked about ethos and pathos and logos with other different reading inquiry units we had done, and I wanted them to apply it with their writing. So the story element was an important piece that I asked my students to bring into their article. I wanted to bring in the idea of the political topic as being personal and the personal bringing political, and we talked and we focused on how pathos, that ability to stir emotions, as well as provide evidence, which is logos, and credibility, ethos, can really help to drive our writing deeper and fuller, and to build some empathy from our readers. And this is something that Kelly Gallagher talks about in his book, Best Interest of the Students, this blending the narrative and the argumentative piece. And that was something that I wanted my students to tap into with their writing, because the personal experience really can strengthen their arguments. And through different models and text exemplars, my students were able to do that. I'm going to try one more time to share with you another writing piece that one of my students had shared with me, and this was probably one of the most powerful writing pieces that I had a student do. That I'll just say that before doing this unit, I was completely unaware of Katie's experience. And she says, most people would say, this is the beginning of her writing piece, most people would say that getting cancer as a child is rare. But if you put it this way, your chances of winning the lottery, 1 in 175 million. The chances of getting childhood cancer, 1 in 285. So it's not rare. And unfortunately, I was that one child, the one out of 285 who was diagnosed with cancer when I was only 5 years old. When my family and I received the news that AML, acute monocytic leukemia, had officially taken over my body, we really were up for any treatment options, even options that would damage my body forever. And with an overall survival rate of 25%, my parents realized that I needed treatment immediately. They didn't really care what the treatment was, as long as it would treat the cancer and hopefully save my life. And that's how Katie starts her article. And when I first read this, I was so taken aback. It was unbelievable to me that first of all, that none of her teachers were aware that this is something that was happening. And also, I was so impressed by her honesty and willing to share something so personal with the rest of the class. And she goes in her article to really, her piece is about an argument against chemotherapy, and how chemotherapy is not your only option when it comes to treating cancer, but there are other options out there. And she weaves in, she begins with her personal, weaves in some statistics, and then continues to weave in and out of her personal and then the research-based. And, you know, what I realized in doing this lesson with my students, whether it's from Olivia talking about losing her dad and being raised by a single mom, or it's about Katie talking about surviving childhood cancer, if we go back to what Phil Billner was talking about in our keynote about, you know, creating a student-centered classroom and bringing student voice to the forefront and turning up the mic for students' voices, there are opportunities to learn so much more from our students. This unit, I found, ended up being invaluable for me. So to learn about my students' own passions, their challenges, and their experience, and also to bring that to the forefront and make their voices loud and clear. Because, you know, it helped to build relationships in the classroom. I was a listener instead of the one doing all the teaching. And the kids were speaking up about issues that range from like water to the personal of surviving cancer, or talking about depression or anxiety. my job then was just to nurture them as writers and to inquire and to push their writing to be as specific and craft worthy as possible, and to get their stories out there. And I took all of their pieces and I put it into a little online flip book for us to share and see. I was, through the time of their writing, for those 2 weeks that we were writing and revising, I was doing different mini lessons about point of view. We talked about transitions, and transitions being the roadmap for our readers to understand the writer's intention and thinking. We talked about editing and how to say less with more, or where were the places that we needed to add more information. We talked about the headlines. We played some headline games because I wanted students to have a title and a headline for their piece. Word choice was a big piece of our units, and also about just spotlighting the issues and bringing that to the forefront. Also, there was a call to action in their closing. That was another piece that I wanted them to focus on, so that there was this, yes, building empathy, but also leading to action and seeing my students as activists throughout the whole piece. So the outcomes, the key ideas, Catherine Bomer talks about in her book, The Journey is Everything, about essay writings, about reclaiming student writing, exploding that idea of the 5-paragraph essay. You know, this, doing an investigative journalism piece, was really about playing with those ideas and reclaiming student voice at the forefront, where students were writing about something that piqued their interest, something that was important to them, something that tapped into their own interests. The unit was about incorporating interdisciplinary connections. I was able to work with my science teachers and help them to give me some feedback on the standards, and give me feedback on share different writing pieces, especially the funny mentor text that I had. And the best part, and I think that this is so important, was that their writing drew upon their personal connections. It wasn't a stale piece of writing where they're regurgitating a theme in an essay. Even though we have those from time to time, there wasn't a specific formula of a 5-paragraph essay or a 3-paragraph essay, but in fact, we were exploding that idea and bringing their stories at the forefront, and effectively braiding and weaving it together with their credibility, with their research, with their testimony, with their personal stories that they blended with that, and they blended the narrative and argumentative writing. So, you know, when we give students the opportunity to actually write about what they're interested in, and when we as their teachers are doing more of the listening than the telling them how it's meant to be done, we are able to produce writing that is powerful, that is engaging, that is informative, that is strengthens their own writing ability and their perspective on the world. And they get to see and realize that their choices and their actions do impact the world in both positive and negative ways. You know, as I said, with Catherine Bomer's The Journey is Everything, you know, you allow students to write about topics that pique their interest. to draw upon the personal connections. And then it also helps them to allow them to discover who they are and also who they want to be. So I have a few more minutes and I could take questions. If you want to tweet out some questions to me, I'm happy to answer questions. I will try again to screen share my slides with you so that you can see the link to the slides and you can go and view the slides for if you want to look closer at my students' exemplars. Again, you can use the hashtag, the EdCollab Gathering #3, or you can do @TeachingFactor to ask me a question as well. Oh, there we go. So somebody asked, where do I find my articles? I read the science section of the New York Times every Tuesday. I always find fascinating things and articles in Psychology Today. Wired is another great article if you want something that's technology based. National Geographic, I love. I mean, vividly for the pictures. And then I'll also look at other newspapers and to help with those different perspectives. But I'd say that the majority of my pieces are coming from National Geographic, the Science Times, Wired. I had one from Psychology Today that I use with my students, and I'm constantly compiling a mentor like textbook so that my students have like I'll have a binder in my room, or on my Google Classroom, I'll put up links to different articles that I use. But if something captures my attention, I put it away because I know that I'm going to use it again. And it's a resource for my students. So that's sort of where I find my articles. And you know, and people share a lot on Twitter, and somebody will put an interesting link to something that will catch my attention, and I'll just favorite it and save it and catalog it and curate it with my work. So, and the best is when my students come in and share an article or a funny piece that they found or they stumbled upon. So thank you for watching. Thank you to the EdCollab Gathering for such an amazing and awesome day. It is so wonderful to be a part of so many and be included with amazing educators. Melissa, thank you for all your tech help today. And I hope everybody has a fabulous day. Feel free to contact me if you have further questions about anything that I talked about.
Okay, so we have some great sessions coming up. We have a session with Donalyn Miller and Travis Crowder about expanding adolescents' worldview with young adult literature. We have Stephanie Schwab about summer reading from Slide to Success. We have Heather Rocco, Christopher Bronk, Emily Mixner, and Una Abrams on innovative approaches to PD. And then we have Molly Feeney-Wood and Eric Lepis on Pump Up the Volume, how to write powerful poetry in the primary grades, and lots of it. So we have a lot of great sessions, and that is just for session 2. So there's a lot more, but thank you so much, Michele, for contributing today, and we really appreciate it. So interesting to hear about all that you shared. So thanks a lot, everybody.